of the things that made me who I am were me being self-motivated and figuring it out. And in my case, it was like my dad refused to address my boredom issues. He told me point blank, like, your boredom issue is your issue, man. Figure that out, and sort of pushed me to do things, but that I had to sort of figure out my boredom.
Rain, it's not just the thing that comes out of the sky almost every day in Eugene, Oregon. It's also a Regional Accelerator and Innovation Network in Eugene, Oregon. It's episode 66 of the 1004 show. We're talking with the Executive Director and Chief Startup Officer, Joe Maruschak, who tells us a couple of things about what to be doing, what to be looking for with your target customers, specific ways to be engaging with them, what's useful in your startup community and ecosystem, and if you're looking at being more diverse in your community or your business, why you must be proactive to do that. It's episode 66 of the 1004 show. I think you guys are going to enjoy this one. Take it away. Hey, Joe, what's going on?
Gray morning here in Eugene, Oregon.
If you could paint it any color, what color would you paint it?
Eugene at the moment?
Well,
something
gray,
other than
if it's
something,
gray and you don't like it.
Something other than gray. How about that? I'd paint it Christmas colors. I paint it Christmas colors.
Okay, well, it is that time of year, so maybe that's
it is that time of year. Yep, there's a lot of lights going up, so that's what we'll do. We'll put up the lights in our house tonight, and it'll be bring some cheer to the season.
And if you were anything like the Oregon football uniforms, it could be any color. It depends on the week. So
we pick on the week.
Yeah. It depends on the week.
Pink, black. We'll do glow in the dark. So
doesn't matter. Let's start on that point. So I think it's interesting talking about kind of target customers for Eugene, University of Oregon, and they learned through some case studies, through some reaching out to different students at the schools, that they were looking for really funky, unique uniforms, and it's actually helped them from a recruiting standpoint. And I think when we're talking about target customers, a lot of people think it needs to be the standard demographics. But I actually think that those things are important, but we need to go deeper into what those demographics are now. What are some of the things that you're doing to kind of understand that I have this target demo that might be age, sex, went to this school, whatever, but then this other side of it that's like a deeper dive into who they are and maybe where they hang out?
Well, that's a sort of interesting question, because I don't really sort of think of demographics as much, at least, and less and less as time goes by. So initially, when we started this, we had the self-identified startup people. There were people in the community. We were putting this together. There were a whole bunch of people in the startup community, but it wasn't a cohesive startup community. And now it is. So now we actually have hit everybody that's a self-identified startup person. And now we're sort of broadening that outreach to hit people that aren't the self-identified startup person. And as myself as an example, I didn't start my company until after I got a job in the games industry, and I worked as an artist and an animator in the games industry. And then when my company closed down, I did my own startup. And it was about a couple months into my own startup, I was like, oh yeah, this is actually what I'm supposed to be doing, because I'm actually good at this. But I never identified myself as an entrepreneur. I always was a person that didn't like working for other people. Had bold ideas that I wanted to get out there, but I would never pictured myself as the entrepreneur. So what we're finding is that as we're doing outreach, we're not targeting the self-identified entrepreneur. What we're targeting is people that might not necessarily know they're an entrepreneur. So we're experimenting with the language and experimenting with outreach, because you never know where someone's going to come from.
So what type of words other than entrepreneur? Because I love this. What types of words would you use instead of like tinker, inventor, developer, like stuff like that, and then trying to say, hey, there might be this opportunity for you, or what are you thinking?
God, I don't even think we've settled on the language yet. We're trying a bunch of different things. What we try is just do a lot of outreach. What we found with a lot of the workshops that we're doing is that we promote a workshop that's something interesting. Like we have a Kickstarter workshop. Hey, did you ever think about doing a Kickstarter? So I think everyone sort of has an idea and sort of knows what Kickstarter is, or is back to Kickstarter. So all we're saying is like, hey, did you ever think of putting on a Kickstarter? Someone's like, oh, I find that interesting. And then we sort of bring them into the workshop, and then we talk to them about, hey, email marketing. So suddenly they understand that doing a successful Kickstarter is mostly about marketing. And then we actually have a marketing workshop that follows it up. So I think it's getting people in whatever pathway they want to sort of engage with us in. We have, you know, we work with reimagining or redefining women in tech. So there's like a lot of diversity talks going on here right now. And a little bit of this is, you know, part of that thing that's going on nationwide, talks about diversity. So we're capturing people into the ecosystem that way. You know, they come to a talk here inside the building. They're like, "What's this building?" They're like, "Oh, it's got all this entrepreneurial stuff, startups. It's got some product stuff in the back." And I was like, "This place is just cool." You know, so a lot of it's just trying to engage people on something that they think is cool for whatever reason they think it's cool, because it's pushing the limits of ideas, because it's just a cool place to hang out. It kind of doesn't matter to us. You know, what we're trying to do is get the people that are inspired about anything for any reason, and you know, sort of bring them in, and then there a certain subset of those people actually have like an idea that they want to move forward. So that's the way we capture them. So that's the way I'm thinking about it, because I come constantly surprised. You know, you think you have a demographic or a target market, it's like students, and I think it's much broader than that. There's people with ideas, people that don't quite fit. There's a certain type of people that have the sort of entrepreneurial mindset,
Yeah.
and we identify it in them. They haven't self-identified it in themselves, and a lot of them do feel like outcasts. They know that they don't quite think the same as everyone else, but they don't know what that means. They know they just feel a little different. And oftentimes we find that, you know, they struggled in high school, or not struggled, you know, struggled as in it was unable to keep their interest in high school. They were always like chasing ideas, or always were wanting to.
So you're saying I'm an outcast. I appreciate that.
Well, all entrepreneurs are
Yeah.
outcasts.
No,
You know,
absolutely.
it's you know, there's a it's one of the reasons why we do the accelerator and we do the things we do, is because people that do startups, and it's a weird journey, you know, and it's kind of isolating. You know, so the more people you have around you that are with you on that journey, the more successful you're going to be, or maybe you can be able to deal with it a little bit better. You know, because it's kind of disconcerting
Sure.
being an entrepreneur. Um, and it's a, you know, it is a rarefied experience. I'd say like 90% to 95% of the people in the United States, they don't have a worldview of starting their own company. They see it through the lens of a job. You know, they wake up in the morning, they go somewhere, and they trade their time on a per hour basis, and they get a paycheck. You know, and that is their mental model of how the entire world works. So you try and say, hey, there's a different way. You actually don't have to go to work and have someone else pay you and have a boss. And they're just like, you know, it's just like they just can't grok it, and they just don't see the world that way.
Well, I mean, they
So,
have many years of being told that it is one way. So then
ex-
to change that,
yeah,
it's difficult.
it's difficult. And some people, it's like they don't care. You know, they actually like the segmentation. It's like, I like going to work and coming home, and then it's my time.
Yeah.
You know, they have this compartmentalization where they're very comfortable with going to work, and they actually have no problem with it. And there's a good, like, say 50 to 60% of the population have absolutely no problem with someone else being in charge, and they just do a small piece and get a paycheck. Very comfortable. They have great lives. I know that my brain isn't wired that way, where I can actually enjoy that. I find it deeply frustrating. So, you know, to me, it's like I am an outlier. I always found it difficult for me to sort of fit into school or fit into a job, because I just was constantly raging against the machine. And, you know, finally arrived at a place where raging against the machine is,
Not just a band that's crazy.
yeah, it's like, oh, hey, I can rage against the machine and I'm actually adding value. That's awesome. You know, so but it took me a while to find it. Like, you know, I call myself it wasn't until my almost 30 that I discovered that I was an entrepreneur. You know, I wish someone had told me when I was like 15 or 18, like, hey, you look like you might be able to start a company.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that I'm 33 now, so I graduated high school in '02. Definitely not the world that I thought I was getting into, and it's
Mm-hmm.
definitely not what was kind of provided as an opportunity. So I think that's definitely changing. I think parents are going to be the hardest ones to change. I think the kids will be the easy part, and I think we see that it's their parents being okay with it. But kind of on that same note, where you talked about people coming by and being excited about being there, is it that Rain is this great place? You called it cool, like there's this cool place, or is it that have you put the right parts into it to to really help build something beautiful there?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, the place itself is pretty cool. So it's kind of cool space. The space itself feels like a startup space. It feels like a space that you want to go build something in. It feels kind of raw. It feels kind of unfinished. It feels kind of like a funky loft space. It's just kind of a cool place to hang out. And the components that we pulled together, we pulled together a bunch of mentors and a bunch of people in the startup community. And I think there's a little bit of that in there, that people don't see us as threatening and see us as one of themselves. So to me, it's like, so it's like I have tattoos, and my background is I used to ride skateboards, and I lived out of a Volkswagen van for a while. So there's this approachability, because it's like, not like, here's Joe, he was the VP of a bank.
Yeah, I think that's powerful.
There people will say, oh, that guy, he is a little bit more punk rock. So that a little bit more of our ethic here is a little bit more punk rock. And it's the way we behave too. So people come in here, and it seems a lot more approachable. It isn't so formal. So a lot of what we put together is sort of an informality around everything that we do that makes it very, very approachable.
It's a good word for it, because I think that stuffy white collar lawyer's office, it's probably pretty.
It's institutional. It's like right now, you think of the university or the small business development centers or any of the support groups. Oftentimes, it does feel clinical. You go in, you have to make an appointment, and you go and you meet with someone, and you sit on the other side of a desk, and then they review a plan. It's a formalized interaction, and I think that sort of prevents people from getting into the ecosystem, because a lot of people just have a stupid idea. When you first come up with an idea, hey, I have a crazy idea, and at first it is crazy. You haven't really vetted it. You haven't really thought about it. Sometimes you don't know how, and that's what we see is people don't even know how to look at it. So to get over that wall of embarrassment, to say, I'm going to go make an appointment to meet with an experienced business counselor and just tell them about my stupid idea, and then expose that I don't know what the hell I'm doing. That's sort of a challenging thing for a lot of people. So creating sort of an informal atmosphere where it's like, got a stupid idea, show up. We'll tell you if it's dumb, or we'll tell you what the next steps are, but we won't really do it in a very, very non-threatening way, because they can just show up and make an appointment and talk to us. We say, it's like, you want a one-on-one, just send us an email. We'll do a one-on-one sit down with you. You don't have to have a business plan. You don't have to have anything. Just sit down with us. We'll and talk to us.
Yeah, approachable, very welcoming. I think those are really important things in spaces, and I think it's really important to be welcoming in those kind of situations. You talked a little bit about diversity and how you guys are trying to be more diverse. What are some things that you're doing that have worked, you think will continue to work, and what are some things that you've maybe run that really just bombed?
I think there's nothing that bombed. I think right now we're doing a lot more proactively. So I think the challenge for me really was like, it was something in my mind, but it was something that I wasn't proactively working on early. And because it's like, to me, diversity is an issue. It's like, and I'm personally have no prejudice at all. But as you come to understand, as you sort of get more involved with it, you understand the experience of the people that you're dealing with. Sort of, if you're not part of the solution, then you're part of the problem. So it's not enough for me to be, accept diversity and just accept it and be passive about it. I actually have to be proactive about it. So a lot of this is supporting diversity where we see it, and a lot of this is sort of the evolution of the soapbox that you get on. Like right now, it's like people read my resume. It's like Joe Maruschak, Chief Startup Officer, Executive Director of Eugene, Managing Director of Coast to Crest Seed Fund. It sounds really, really impressive. And now I'm getting emails like that start off like, Mr. Maruschak, we know you're busy. So there's a position of power that I'm in now. Whether it's real or not, there's a perceived position of power that gives me a soapbox to sort of promote diversity a lot more, because I have weight. So it's like, if I'm not proactively involved in things, then I am part of the problem. And the way I'm doing it right now is, through other groups like the Redefining Women in Tech. We are a big, big supporter of Redefining Women in Tech. Lauren Jerome, so we made her a mentor in residence here in order to allow her to sort of expand upon the diversity platform. So to me, it's like identifying people that are actually moving that pushing that agenda forward and actually empowering them to the extent possible that I can. To me, it's personally difficult because it's like, how do you promote diversity without being paternal? Like, I'm an old white guy, so it's like, how can I, how do you promote diversity when you're how do you lead diversity when you're an old white guy? I'm part of the establishment by both, by my birth. So it's always more. I think everything we've done has been successful, not to the extent that we would like. And a lot of this is just, it's so systemic. And I see it in my daughter. It's all these things that they're programmed from a very, very young age, particularly when it comes to like STEM. It's like, oh, engineering, math, that's not ladylike. And you see it with my daughter. She's really, really into science, and she's also really, really into arts and music. But it's like, in school, her being interested in science is kind of weird. She's kind of like the geeky kid. So when you are socializing young teenagers, and there's a stigma attached to being a geek, I think that's problematic. And I think the males overcome that a bit more because being an engineer is sort of a man thing, and it's certainly not a girl thing. So I think that there's a lot of reprogramming that has to happen across all levels of our society. Because when you're dealing with me, it's like the later stage, you're doing a startup. That's why I am involved in a lot of activities. We're involved in a lot of activities. There's like this matrix of things that we're working on. And when you think of entrepreneurial support systems, that's the most visible thing that we do, but we're heavily involved in capital formation, infrastructure development, and workforce development. And workforce development, that's like a generational view. How do you develop the next generation workforce? Well, you can't develop the next generation workforce today. You've got to think about it generationally. So when we're thinking about the kids in grade school today, they're going to be the leaders of the future. So I try as much as possible to get involved with the early school programs as much as possible to sort of, be a beacon.
Yeah.
I don't know what the right word is, but just get in front of them.
I think that's so true, though. You have to be proactive, with these things, and if you're not proactive, then you're part of the problem. And I agree with that. One thing that I've done in the past, and urge other people to do as well. I don't have a huge organization, so I can't necessarily do all these things. But let's say that there was a group, and it was a not very diverse group, and it was a bunch of old white guys. I think you were alluding to that earlier. A way that I believe that you can bring diversity into that, even if you're the leader and you have to be there, is to bring someone with you that might be that next coming, and have them sit at the table and have them have conversations. Even if they're not supposed to be there, still do it and be that leader and say, no, this person needs to be in this room. I understand I need to be here too, but so does so-and-so behind me, because they are a future and they need to be in this conversation. And I think if we would just have, your Batman and your Robin, I think if you have the Robins there, I think that can dramatically change that conversation and get people to stop thinking the old same way.
Yeah, totally. And it's even the construct you use, like the Batman, the Robin. To me, it's like, it suggests sort of a hierarchy. And to me, a lot of this diversity is like, oh, they're just like your underling. It's like, no, they're possibly what would be considered the other Batman or Wonder Woman. It's like
that's very fair. That's very
fair.
fair.
They're at an equal level. They're just not there for reasons of we have the system we have,
yeah.
And the system is the problem. So how do you remake a system? And part of this is, and we get in trouble for it a little bit because we're definitely iconoclasts. We throw rocks at the temple all the time. So at times we get into trouble for sort of calling out like, hey, this is an old white guys club. And people are like, whoa, but we're all well-meaning. It's like, yeah, I'm not saying you're not well-meaning, and it leads to difficult conversations. But I think in the end, it all works out.
RAIN is an acronym for Regional Accelerator Acceleration and Innovation Network.
Yes.
How long did it take for you guys to come up with that? I mean, was it something that you guys wanted to be an acronym? How did that whole thing go down?
So the acronym, I wasn't involved in that process. That was the part of the original pitch that the few people in the beginning came together. Regional Accelerator Innovation Network came up with an acronym. Oregon RAIN, RAIN's in Oregon a lot. Was kind of like, oh. kind of fit. I think the way it came together, the components of it are actually fairly important. It's a regional accelerator. One of them over there. There's two regional accelerators. There's the Rain Eugene Accelerator and there's the Advantage Accelerator in Corvallis. And then we think about the innovation networks. And when we think of RAIN, it's like two pieces, RAIN. So Regional Accelerator, Innovation Network. What's the innovation network? And the innovation network is all the other. And there's a lot of other. So that's, I think the name, even though it was sort of chosen to be an acronym and it's chosen to be quippy, works to our benefit. And so when I talk about RAIN and I talk about the innovation network, it gives me the opportunity to sort of pull apart all the components of the innovation network and get people to sort of engage in it in a way that they feel they can engage. So when you think of entrepreneurial support systems, people are thinking like, yeah, you run an accelerator and you do these training programs. And I'm like, yeah, but that's just the educational component of it. When you're growing entrepreneurial ventures, there's all these other things: infrastructure, capital, workforce, all the other things. Think of this as like the nutrients in the soil for a growing plant. If those things don't exist, we won't have companies here. So it's like trying to engage people across the spectrum of all these things that support businesses in a community. And some of it's sort of reframing how they fit into the innovation network. Like you talk to insurance people or bankers, and they're like, how do I fit into the innovation network? And it's like, businesses need banking. Businesses need insurance. They need benefits. They need cars. It's like sort of, they need things. So reframing it for everyone, saying, hey, if you're somehow supporting the growth of an innovation economy, or even if you're supporting the growth of an economy in Eugene, you're part of this innovation network. So I think it's, the names have been valuable to us in the conversations we've been able to have around pulling apart the name. What does it mean to have an innovation network?
Sure.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about rain until you mentioned it that way, that it rains a lot there. So
that was the whole thing. It was like Oregon rain. It was like, oh, that's cute. And now it's like, but is it really?
So tell me a little about the evolution of how it started. So it was a handful of meetups that then you guys decided to do an accelerator. Kind of what's the backstory of that?
So the backstory. So I started a company 2001, and there's part. The reason why I was focused on that company, it will come out later. So from 2001 to 2007, well, 2001, 2004 was my startup, and my startup got bought by our publisher, and I became part of a larger startup, which was a company called Garage Games. Garage Games was making video games for the web. And then in 2007, we sold that company to IAC, which is Interactive Corporation out of New York, which owns College Humor and a whole bunch of Match.com and a whole bunch of other big things. And then I stayed with that company until 2009. And in 2009, I left, and I was burnt out. So I took about a year off, year and a half off. And then I started, I want to do another startup. And I started looking for, where's the scene? Where's the scene in town? And what I found was there was no scene. There were people doing startups, but there wasn't a scene around it. There wasn't really a place to go. And then I thought back to when I was doing my startup. So when I was doing my startup, I was focused on one thing, working on the startup. It was 60, 70 hours a week. I wasn't involved in the community. And the people I started meeting that were doing startups or had done startups in Eugene were sort of in the same boat. They're all traded sector. They're selling stuff. Some were doing very, very well. They have no interactions in town. All their customers are outside of town. Some are making money. Some even sold their companies. That just happens under the radar in Eugene. And I sort of saw myself as I wasn't giving back when I was doing my own startup. And right now that I'm looking to do my next startup, there's no scene because there's nobody doing it. So I just started taking it upon myself to just sort of create one. So we started doing coffee meetups. We did this one event called Jumpstart Eugene, where we just put flyers up all over town and said, hey, if you're interested in startups, show up. Show up in the lobby of the Broadway Commerce Center on this date, and we'll just talk about startups. We had flip charts and everything. And a bunch of people showed up, 50, 70 people. It's kind of this big event. People showed up. And then
wow.
And sort of said, hey, what do you see going on? And out of that came the coffee meetups. I started holding biweekly coffee meetups. I first started holding them at a coffee shop called the Barn Light until it started getting too big. So there were certain meetups that were 40 people showing up at 9 a.m. at a coffee place where they're like, crap, we don't have enough people to serve them coffee. And they're actually developed a scene started to develop. That ended up getting me introduced to a whole bunch of people. So I got connected to people at Techstars in Boulder, and I got connected to Rick Tarosi, who runs PyPDX at a Portland Incubator Experiment. So I was going around the state just trying to see who was doing this stuff.
Is that Silicon Florist too?
Silicon Florist, same guy.
Yep.
Yeah. So I got introduced to Rick and Mitch Doherty up in Portland. Um, I was just getting introduced all over the state, and I was fascinated by accelerators. I was reading up on it. I co-founded with a couple other people a co-working space, biotech space called Fertilab, which was, we called it a biotech incubator. When we first started out, we just rented a floor of an old building over in the kind of the planing mill district. It's kind of an industrial district, and just kind of moved in and hacked together a lab. And then people started showing up and hanging out over there. So it was, and then that was about 2013. And then 2014 is when this Regional Accelerator Innovation Network was actually the cities of Eugene and Corvallis, the U of O, University of Oregon, and OSU, Oregon State University, out of Corvallis, an hour north of us, proposed this to the legislature, which is like, hey, we want to do this innovation economy around creating sort of a research triangle type of thing outside of the universities in conjunction with communities. So they made this proposal to the legislature, and the legislature funded it. And it was like, oh, awesome. And then so Corvallis already
you
had.
weren't expecting them to actually fund it?
I think they were expecting something, but it was like, oh, cool. So Corvallis already had an accelerator as an extension of the university, which was called the Advantage Accelerator. And here in Eugene, they were like, what are we going to do here? And they turned to me and said, hey, Joe, we know you've been talking to people that have been running accelerators. You're mentoring accelerator to Portland. Would you be willing to set up an accelerator here? I was like, sure. So they just said, okay, well, here's a budget, go. So Eugene Chamber of Commerce actually had some space upstairs from a tenant that had moved out. So we set up an accelerator upstairs, the Eugene Chamber of Commerce. They were a fantastic partner. And I came up with the curriculum, and that was sort of not me coming up with the curriculum, was me using best practices. I talked to people at MIT, and I looked at the Techstars and Y Combinator programs and sort of pieced together a program, recruited my first cohort. I think from kickoff to recruiting my first cohort and starting it was like 90 days, 80 days, 90 days when I first got started, and I've been doing it ever since. And it's been growing and shifting and expanding. But that's kind of how it got kicked off. It was very, very grassroots. It was me and a few other people that were just really, really interested in startups that were like, we should do this. And it's sort of self-serving. You're wanting to do a startup, and you're just like, I'm tired of being alone. I know there's other people like me out there. So some of the initial things were like, let's just make some noise and see if people come out of the woodwork. And man, they came out of the woodwork. And then it was just.
You and I have a very similar story. So it's always, I'm like, oh, is that me? Like it's because there's not a lot. So there's not a lot of entrepreneurs, period. And then there's not a lot of people who are running entrepreneurial support systems that are doing this kind of for the better.
Come into it. So it's like, got an email intro to Brad Feld after I read his book, Startup Communities, and that's how I got involved. Went and visited Techstars over in like 2013. And over time, you get more and more exposed to some of these people around the nation, and the story is always fairly similar. And it's becoming what Kaufman's now calling an ecosystem builder. And it's becoming a little bit more sort of officialized, official title, because what we're doing is sort of ecosystem building. And people are asking like, well, what does that mean? What is ecosystem building? What sort of programs do you run to build ecosystems?
Does that worry you that it could become more clinical visit, like you said with the SBDCs in the world? Like, do you feel like that stuff is becoming more?
Well, it is because of the way these things are funded. They're programmatically funded. So when you sort of have programs, and the programs have sort of some metric attached to them. And when you're working with state money or anyone else, it's usually like this jobs metric. And it's like, you did a program, how many people ended up with jobs, or how have you created investment or whatever. They're looking for sort of tangible outputs, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just the funding for these things tends to go in that direction most of the time. It's got these hard outputs. And when you think of ecosystem building, it's like building an ecosystem. It's like you're walking into, imagine yourself as like a sharecropper, farmer, homesteader way back in the day, the 1800s. You walk over a mountain, you're like, here's some land that might be a farm. I think I'll set up a farm. So what do? You build a house, you start tilling the soil, and you start learning what grows there. And a lot of people, like, so someone came in and said, well, what are your metrics? It's like, I'm making a farm, man. I'm just trying to make the soil grow stuff. I don't know exactly what I'm growing yet. I'm trying to see what grows here. I'm experimenting.
Especially if you go by Brad's 20-year plan, where it
Oh
takes so
yeah,
long, you know.
it takes.
And we're in. I would say I'm patient zero of the Norfolk startup community, and that was 2010. So we're in year 7, year 8
Yep.
now, and we are nowhere near anything like anything. I mean, it's nowhere near where we were before. But then you see some other communities, and you're like, wow, they've really figured out their stuff, and we still have a long way to go. And those things, that makes you want to do more, makes you want to get ready for more, and doing.
So, but the 10-year view, it's like, so to me, it's like our startup was 9 years, some 8 years.
Yeah.
So it's like even doing a startup to me is like it's an 8-year plan. You start something, a startup, it's going to be 8 to 10 years before you actually exit it or before it comes something substantial that is not it feels like a job that you're not killing yourself for. So to me, I already have like a decade-long view, and then after reading Brad's book, you're like, yeah, it's a generational view. It's a 20-year view. We're 5 years in. I feel like we're getting started. It's like my involvement with some of this stuff is 2000 or 2012. So it feels like we're getting some traction. It feels like we're doing some of the right things. We're doing some things right. We're doing a lot wrong, but we're learning.
Were you doing all the Startup America stuff way back when? Did you do any of that?
What do you mean, like startup weekends? Or
So there was a group. I think it only lasted for like a year, and it was called Startup America Partnership. I think it was. I don't remember who put it on. I think Obama, Steve Case, former CTO of America, Anish Chopra, and a couple other people. I think ultimately it got acquired by TechStars, and now might be something else that they're doing. I can't remember. But
yeah, so that was part of Startup Weekend, and I mean there was all these things that were kind of merging together.
Yeah.
So we were doing Startup Weekends here since like 2011, and then TechStars bought. Yeah, it's kind of a mess. I mean, it's hard to track all these initiatives because it's like something pops up and then it becomes something else, and then it gets buried and rebranded. But we've been involved with all of those, and some things where like Startup Weekend's been mostly a success here. There's other things. I remember there was some sort of website, some startup curators website thing where you signed up to become a community champion, which never went to this.
Maybe
might have been. It kind of never went anywhere. It's like there were a whole bunch of little, but every time something comes along, we're like, we'll jump on that because you never know who you're going to meet.
Right.
So I'm involved. Go ahead.
In regards to a startup weekend, what were the expectations for something like that at the end of it? Like, what were you hoping would happen?
First one, I don't know. It's like you're always trying to see what comes out of the woodwork. You're just trying to gauge a sense of what the volume is of people. So the first one to me is like, well, who's here? We have the regulars, the people who are self-identified. Is there anyone else in this community that's interested, particularly younger people or people maybe from outside the community that you weren't aware of? So to me, it's like, am I going to meet new faces? Am I going to see people that I didn't know existed? And that every single one we did, you end up seeing new faces. I think over time it's evolved. So now when we do them, I'm more thinking about pipeline. So somebody comes in and I'm always sort of taking the temperature of like, well, what's next for them? If we're getting a bunch of people that are interested in these sorts of things, what other support resources exist or don't exist? And what does access to those look like? So it's changed over time. So at first it was just me personally trying to see who's there, out of self-interest. I want to make new friends. And now it's morphed over time because now everyone I meet, it's like we start seeing a lot of food and beverage companies, people interested in doing food and beverage startups, and we're like, ooh, okay, what sort of resources do and don't exist here? What do we have to build out?
Food incubation, place to food kitchen, test kitchen type of stuff.
Well, we have test kitchens, but a lot of this is becomes more complex because then you have with food and beverage, you have sort of regulatory pathways, you have health and safety training. When you think there's a food kitchen, but a food kitchen doesn't do you really any good if it's not separated by regulatory pathways. and if it doesn't have the cleanliness standards, and if it doesn't have the training to keep the cleanliness standards. So like a commercial kitchen's a commercial kitchen, but it's not an industrial kitchen that will actually get you to scale. And a lot of people, when they first go into their first kitchen, almost immediately tend to go to co-packers if they're going big. So what does that, what does that look like? So I think that those are some of the things we're starting to assess, not just like, oh, what's a test kitchen look like, but what does it look like at a bigger scale? Right now, one of the things that's been identified is a food testing lab, and not just for startups, but for bigger traded sector food companies here. Like, oh yeah, it'd be awesome to have a testing lab here, so we can do more R&D here, and not mailing it away to Portland or Seattle to get our food testing done. So it's, again, thinking about these in a more systemic sort of way. Thinking about it in terms of the pipeline. What we're finding here is capital for startup companies. If you're biotech or tech, it's hard to get capital anywhere, but it's easy to get it if you're a tech company with a good idea. Food and beverage companies are really, really hard to finance, as are consumer packaged goods, clothing. So what we're looking at right now is we're seeing a lot of those ideas sort of pop up out of the woodwork, and we're looking at a sort of early stage capital gap. Like, how do food companies get financing? And there's all these weird side effects that, since they can't get early capital, a lot of them grow off cash flow, which means they grow slower than they could if they were getting investment, which means their year-over-year growth rate is actually artificially depressed because they're growing off cash flow. So when you look at comps to other fast-growing food companies, they look like dogs, even if they're fantastic. So you have all these challenges where you're like, okay, what do we have to do to increase access to capital? But it's not the access to capital blanket statement. It's like, specifically, what do we have to do to get access to capital to early stage food and beverage companies, and the ways that those specific companies need it. And that's been a lot of what's my evolution in Startup Weekend, and a lot of my evolution with a lot of these events is just getting a better understanding what the entrepreneurial need is.
Sure.
Or a lot of it is what it actually is, like what's the actual need and what's the perceived need.
And those are oftentimes very different things.
Yep.
A lot of startup communities are very focused on their local business community. But if you really think about some of the things that are missing, it's the access to things that are outside of their local community. So how do you have those businesses start having recognize that and start having conversations with people that can help them that aren't in Eugene proper?
That's a tough question. I mean, the people that are coming into it, like the mentors, are already traded sector. They already have all these relationships outside of Eugene. I think they get a little frustrated with the local economic development ecosystem, which tends to be very provincial. Which is, how do we make Eugene better? And it's like, you make Eugene better by partnering with Portland and becoming a player on the global stage, not by, if you keep it all centered in Eugene, we're just shuffling money around inside this small bubble. We've got to make it bigger. I think there's a gap because the people that are sort of mentors here are in that mindset already, and the people that are local legislators are focused on Eugene. It's their job. And so oftentimes you have this conversation that's going like that. I think there's this constant having those conversations and bridging those gaps to get it so there's a common understanding. I think that there's this recognition here. We're getting a lot of boomerangs, and people are seeing it, so that's sort of helping. And the boomerangs are sort of people that are coming back to Eugene. There's people that are either born here or went to the U of O, University of Oregon, and have gone. And there's a whole bunch of people that have worked in Asia, or a whole bunch of people that have gone to San Francisco now that are sort of coming back. So the people that have worked in Asia have kids. They want to go to school in the United States, so they're coming back to where they grew up and went to school. And we're seeing an influx of a lot of people from San Francisco that are kind of like going like, yeah, San Francisco kind of sucks. It's like lots of traffic, very, very expensive. And they're saying, yeah, it's not feeling innovative anymore. It's feeling mercenary, and it's feeling like an echo chamber. And what we're seeing, particularly with younger ones, are like, yeah, Juicero, juice machine, really? It's like, I wanted to get into startups and entrepreneurship because I wanted to change the world. They still are like, making the world a better place kind of thing. And they're like, yeah, and you go down and you work for some of the startups down there, and they're not making the world a better place. So you're seeing people now coming to some of these smaller communities, Eugene, Austin, Madison, Charlotte, Lincoln, Nebraska, Bozeman, Montana, that are actually saying, well, yeah, I moved out here because it's more likely to do an ag tech startup here than I am in Silicon Valley, because ag tech in Silicon Valley not a thing. And ag tech will actually change the world, or education tech. So you're starting to see the younger generation in particular that I don't want to say bought into the change the world idea but actually it's like, no, they actually do want to solve hard problems, and they're not just all about the money. Millennials get a bad rap for wanting to change the world or being too idealistic, but a lot of them are putting their money where their mouth is. They're like, no, I actually do want to do something hard and do want to make a difference.
I'm sure it's also because places that you hear about a lot, they're kind of oversaturated at that point. So it's very difficult to become that next big thing, to be able to do. There might be a lot more access to capital, a lot more access to things, but if you become the huge fish in a very small pond in Eugene and Cheyenne and Bismarck, North Dakota and Lincoln, Nebraska, it's a lot easier to then be seen there, really understand the problem, and then maybe hit mass scale.
Yeah, totally. And and there's constantly we have to be reaching out to sort of create those connections. That's a big part of my job. I'm constantly trying to connect with people, connecting with you, trying to make this a sort of a smaller planet. And as it relates to entrepreneurship, it's a 1 degree, 2 degrees of separation. It's like once you get to know somebody, just about everybody. You're one step away from anybody running any entrepreneurial program across the United States. It's a very, very small group. It's not like 1 million people that are working on this stuff. The people that are sort of taking it seriously. It's like 1,000, a couple hundred to 1,000 people that are kind of hardcore on this. And so it's not like you. Well, it's sort of like a mini army of people, but constantly reaching out. So you think about venture capital formation. It's a very, very small group. You have a better chance of becoming a Major League Baseball player than you do becoming a venture capitalist.
Is that true?
Statistically, that's what I hear. I haven't actually run the numbers, but it's a very, very small group. So so you have this small group, which is challenging, but then say, well, what's the opportunity with the small group? Well, you can actually reach out to all of them and talk to them all. And every single conversation you have creates a slightly smaller world, gives you a little bit more access. And then it's engaging the people. Like I said, for us, it's the boomerangs, the people that have left Eugene. So, people are like, oh, I don't want people to leave. It's like, well, we don't want them to leave, but if they leave and they go out and they actually go to Europe, or they go work in Seattle, or go to Hong Kong or San Francisco, and they decide to come back someday, they're going to come back with a bunch of connections and knowledge.
I always think that story could be spun so differently too. Facebook was not created in San Francisco. It was not created in Silicon Valley. It moved from Boston, and yeah. That's a big story. But there's plenty of stories that are just like that, and maybe smaller scale. I want to know a little bit about Joe. I want to know about you. I want to ask you some questions that might be difficult. We'll start with the fun ones. If you were a celebrity, dead or alive, who would you be?
Celebrity, dead or alive, who would I be?
I didn't tell you these questions in the pre-roll.
I have no idea. I've never thought about it. I wouldn't want to be a celebrity. I don't know.
Or someone, maybe not a celebrity, but if there's someone or something that you could be.
Dalai Lama.
Okay.
I mean, be a force for good. So if I could be anyone, it'd be a force for good that could educate. That or Carl Sagan. I guess Carl Sagan would be. That's who I would be. Carl Sagan.
Two people.
But Carl Sagan, particularly because he was sort of a force for good that actually went out there and sort of educated people and in a way that went far beyond, as a scientist, what he was expected to do.
Yeah.
It really made science accessible to the masses. I mean, it's still the original Cosmos TV series is still my favorite all-time program. Favorite thing ever made, ever. I think that was brilliant. So,
what is your favorite day of the week?
Favorite day of the week? I don't know. They all blend together. I have absolutely no idea. Probably Thursday,
Okay.
probably Thursday, because I stack all my meetings up in Monday to Wednesday. So Thursday is my favorite day of the week because it's the sort of freest day of the week where most of the new happens.
Very cool. Do you say no a lot?
To
People reaching out. I mean, so it took me months to get you on the show, right? So how do you say no? How do you train yourself to say no?
I'm still working on it. Um, I, I I haven't learned to say no, although I know I have to. I'm getting better at it. Usually, it's become sort of a self-managing problem, as in my email inbox overflows. So it's like I wasn't blowing you off. It was just like I had so much stuff going on. It's stuff just goes below the fold,
Sure.
and you have things just coming at you all the time. So a lot of my saying no actually hasn't been me saying no. It's just me um, not saying yes.
So how do you complete those distractions then? How do you deal with those distractions? Are those things that are in the way that you need to get done so that you could do something else?
I work a lot.
There you go.
I just work a lot, and part of it's just I'm pretty good at prioritizing things. So I've become very, very efficient at prioritizing things. I actually enlist the help of people, and a lot of this is like the network. When people come and work for me or work with me, so I don't employ anybody, but I have a lot of contractors that work with me, and I give them a lot of responsibility. They're like, "Hey, I'd like to take this on." I'm like, "Take it all and more." So I've become really good at prioritizing what I have to focus on, and really good at handing stuff off. So I realized a long time ago that I can only scale a certain amount. So I try to bring people around me that are willing to take on stuff, even stuff that I really, really want to do myself or think I could do better myself. I just recognize that I cannot scale personally. So I have to actually look to help other people, bring other people on and help them do the same thing I do.
It's a huge thing that not many people are willing
But
to do.
I don't say no a lot. I probably say yes far too often.
Well, thanks
But
for saying yes to this.
well, it's like you always say yes because you never know.
Exactly.
You never know whose life you're going to change. And so to me, it's like, yeah, if 1 out of every 10 meeting leads to a life changing moment for someone, even if it's a small, like little bitty nudge in the right direction, then it makes it worth it. So I say yes a lot.
What is on your bucket list?
On my bucket list?
Yeah.
Jeez.
These hard?
Uh,
These questions hard?
these questions are hard for me. Um, I don't know. I don't really have a bucket
What's
list.
something that you haven't done that you want to do?
Things that I want to do are sort of big things.
That's a bucket
Uh,
list, right?
yeah, but it's more comprehensive than that. So I don't have a bucket list of things to do.
Okay.
Like so I've never been to Europe or Asia, and I would like to go there someday. But how? So I hate going on vacations. I hate being a tourist. So my bucket list would be I would like to rent a boat and do the entire Mediterranean coast,
Okay.
and then go out and up the entire east coast of Europe. So I would like to do a tour of Europe and every country in Europe, but I would like to start, you know, Egypt, Turkey, Italy,
I'm helping
Spain.
you accomplish your bucket list.
Yeah, so it's not just like I going to Spain would be fun, but it's like, yeah, that's not what I want to do. I actually want to spend like 6 months traveling through Europe with my family in a very sort of in-depth way. It's got to be like full immersion. So some of the things I want to do are very, very much like that. They have to be full immersion. I would love to. I've driven across the United States several times, but I want to take a year off and get like an RV again with my family and go visit all the national monuments in the United States, but not one at a time. I want to do it full immersion, 1 year, every single monument, all of them in order. So everything that I do,
Is
it's
there a
like
list of those, like in order that you could do? Do people do that?
there's probably several, or I'd have to
Yeah.
put one together. But that's, to me, it's the way I'm wired. It's not like, oh, I want to do a thing. I want to go to Machu Picchu. To me, it's like, meh.
Yeah.
It's a thing. It's a 2-day event. When I do things, I don't do them small. I do them it's the way my brain works. I have to go all in and have to do it in a very deep, comprehensive way, or else it's meaningless to me. Then it just becomes, to me, it's like going to Tokyo. What's the difference between going to Tokyo and going to downtown Eugene? There's food, there's places to shop. You got to find a place to sleep. Yeah, I guess there's some culture there that you can get into, but if you really want to be immersed in a culture, you got to go live in the culture. You got to be fully immersed. It's not something you could do in a one-day trip. So I just, all the things on my bucket list. Um, I'd like to buy and restore an old race car, and like an old Austin Healey or an old Jaguar, a barn find type of thing, and spend a couple years restoring it, or an old motorcycle. Those are things that I just haven't pursued that yet. I did see was its old auto body shop on the way home from when I go home from work that had a Volvo P1800. Like really, and it was under this tent thing and sat there for like 8 months. And I'm like, what? It's just sitting there. And then one day it was gone. I just never thought to just like walk up and ask the guy, like, what are you doing with that thing? It's just going to sit there and rot. So there's this dream someday I'm going to stumble across a car like that. But I think it has to be like that. It's not like I have to go out and look for an old Porsche. It's like somehow events have to transpire that like a 1967 Porsche 911 lands in front of me and the opportunity is obvious. My so the question is really hard because I actually don't have like a list of things that I want to do because if they don't get done, I'm not going to be upset by them. There's things that if they transpired, I'd totally be all over them. But if they don't transpire, I'm not going to be upset. I mean, most of the things that are on most people's bucket lists, I have a weird way that I approached life is that most of the things that I wanted to do in my life, I did them in my 20s. Like I did them all. So now there's not much left of the things that I didn't do. And now what I'm doing now, which is giving back and trying, this is fascinating. I'm helping to build a community. I actually feel like I'm making a difference in the community, which to me is like, this is actually kind of cool. It's fun. It's fun every single day. And if you said, hey, would you give that up to go backpacking in Europe? I'm like, I don't know, maybe, not really. I mean, this is kind of fun. That's why I'm doing it, because I enjoy it. Going backpacking in Europe is like have to figure out what kind of food to eat and where to go to the bathroom and what kind of hotels are good. And my kids would complain because I wouldn't have access to the Xbox. I mean, you ask the hardest questions.
That's the idea. I think we both believe that education is really, really important. I'm interested though in what your thought is on where education is going in its current kind of state, and is it going to fully go? Is it going to fully go online? Because and then is it going to be more cohort based, or are cohorts more like school systems where you have a bunch of people in there and that's important? Like what?
I'd nuke the school system. So education right now, I would nuke the school system. I mean, this is a school system as it's set
level?
up.
At college? On
all of them. Well, I don't know about college. College tries to reprogram people, but generally grade school right now socializes and programs people to be manufacturing factory workers. It was actually designed to be that. From the start time with the bell to the lunch time being at a certain time to the going home when the bell rings. I mean, it's designed to make factory workers. It's designed to make these servile factory workers that do a job that's very, very specific. And I think that's doing a disservice to our children, because the people that are going to do the best in the future are the ones that have broad range of interests, self-motivated to figure things out, and with the way, like you don't just get a job anymore and stay there your whole life. You have to learn how to navigate a path. So something that was more along the lines of something that actually trained people to do that, I think would be a benefit. We joked about doing a road trip. Geez, you want to educate our kids? Go buy them a Volkswagen van and tell them to drive across country in a Volkswagen van. I mean, it'll break down and they'll have to figure it out, but it's like send people on adventures where they have to sort of figure out how to get through that. And something that, it's kind of like a joke, but figuring out how to get a van running, it will teach you about engineering, it will teach you about logistics, it will teach you about finance, it will teach you about a lot of things, teach you about prioritization. A Volkswagen van, and I think that there's a thing that I learned because I did travel in a Volkswagen van. There's this startup concept of good enough. So there's like having your car running like in good shape, like a properly running vehicle, and then there's the thing that is a Volkswagen engine. And a Volkswagen engine, even in the best of shape, is kind of like this shaky thing that's kind of held together by hope. So it's having someone drive, own a Volkswagen and just that as their primary mode of transportation, I think is just amusing because it sort of reprograms people to, like when is good enough good enough? And in a Volkswagen van, it's like, well, does it get you to the next thing? Well, if it got you from where you were to the next thing, then it was good enough because perfection's a direction. And no matter how perfect a Volkswagen engine is, it's still going to break down all the time. So it's I think there's some things that we could do to education to introduce some of these concepts into education that would sort of help people socialize around how they learn in a different way. And I am actually a big proponent. It's like, yeah, kids 8 or 9 years old, give them an engine, have them rebuild a V8 engine, get an old V8, have them put together an engine, make it run, have them do that.
And if you think about it, at some point in life, our children, I don't have kids, but I remember being a kid this, and it sounds like you have kids, and there's millions of kids in the world, but up until what, 3 or 4, like they're allowed to evolve and figure that out. And then as soon as they get into the school system, it's like, nope, everyone's gonna be the same. And that's where it goes wrong. And so you have to look a certain way. And then basically that's your whole life. And so those, as you call them, outcasts, are really the ones that can figure out and, during school, but I'm a C- scholar, if you will. And it's because I didn't like the scenario. I wanted to be doing things. And when I was in the classes where I could physically do something, I did really, really, really well. But when I had to go into this other place and learn a different way, it was painful. But I love education. I love learning. And
I love learning.
And I think that's what people miss is we're not saying learning is wrong. We're not saying education needs to go away. It needs to be done a completely different way.
It totally does. So like my daughter and my son, I mean, and it's tough because I never did my homework and I ended up doing okay. So like we go to the conference, the teacher's like, your daughter's not doing her homework. And I'm like, yeah, bummer. It's like, I'm not really going to push her that hard. My son, just, he does well in test, and they're both brilliant, but she struggles with homework, and my son just flat out does not do his homework. Like he just, Jonathan, your homework done? Yep. You find out later, like he never turned in any of his homework ever.
How old are they?
11 and 14.
Okay.
It's just, and that's, they struggle with homework, and they struggle with sort of the structure of school because they both hate it. And Anya's brilliant. She loves to learn. She's into music. She's into art. She's into science. She's into whatever. She hates homework. She just actually hates the structure of homework, partly because she's a perfectionist. She gets really, really picky about her math. Did I do it right? It's really, really worked up about it. And to me, it's just like, it doesn't matter in the big scheme of things. And it's been a point of tension in our house. My wife's like, her grades are going to be affected by her homework. And I'm like, yeah, but in the big scheme of things, does it matter whether or not she does her homework? No. It ultimately doesn't matter whether or not she did her homework. Did she learn anything? I think there's a challenge of her becoming self-motivated. That to me is a big challenge, which is sort of where I guess we're going wrong with our children, because we you want to provide your children with a better life than you have or had. And then now they're going through it, I'm like, oh man, some of the things that made me who I am were me being self-motivated and figuring it out. And in my case, it was like my dad refused to address my boredom issues. He told me point blank, like, your boredom issue is your issue, man. Figure that out, and sort of pushed me to do things, but that I had to sort of figure out my boredom. And we didn't do it with our kids. We give them everything they want, and it's like, it's created these little monsters. They aren't bored enough. They don't read enough. Like, to the point, I got to the point where as a child, I started reading. I started reading because there was nothing left to do. There was no TV. There's only a couple channels. And there's books around. So what do? When you finally get bored enough, you actually start to read. And that's not a bad thing. Our kids have access to everything they could ever want. TV, internet, iPads. So it's like I think there's something to be said for getting people into a situation where boredom will actually have them figure out their way out of boredom and not be fed to them.
It's powerful. What's something about Rain or Eugene that we should know about?
Something about Rain or Eugene that you should know about. I have, man. Eugene's an interesting place. It is probably the it's the weirdest town I've ever been in, just because it is so hippie. Raging against talk about raging against the machine. There are still people here fighting the Vietnam War. I mean, it's this last holdout of anarcho hippieism, sort of in the United States. It's weird and it's sort of extreme. So when you come to Eugene, there's this bit of hippie, like still fighting the Vietnam War hippiness that permeates a lot of things that happen, which is at times it's amusing in a lot of ways, and at times it's disconcerting in a lot of ways, because some of the people that are really, really left and progressive here are so far to the left they're almost right wing. The other thing that everyone should know about Eugene is so progressive and so blue state that even the most conservative people here would be considered flaming hippies. It's like the hardcore red staters, like the hardcore Republicans in Eugene, are probably moderate Democrats on the East Coast.
There you go. There's something about Eugene that I did not know.
Yeah, it's
there you go. Joe, I really appreciate your time today.
These weren't hard at all. These weren't hard questions at all.
They weren't?
No. Okay. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No. I appreciate your time today. I learned a lot about Eugene, a lot about Rain, and I think it's always interesting to learn about the similar paths that we both have gone through. And you gave me a lot of useful information, and I think the viewers will believe that as well. And I'm going to start using that word outcast, because I think I've been an outcast for a long time, and now I know what to call myself.
And I don't think outcast. I know it is a more. I think about the Tom Hanks movie. A lot more than. So when you think of outcast, it's like someone who is cast out. Someone who is actually rejected, and I think of it more like someone who's stranded on an island. Like you're out there and you're in the wrong place and you're just kind of stranded.
So I got to find my own Wilson.
Yeah, you got to find your Wilson, because that's what it's like. You're in a place that you're not in the right place, and finding the right place is just a matter of finding the lifeline or the wave, or what did he sail away on? It's a sail made out of a porta potty. I think that's what, if I remember the movie. But it's more along the idea that you're in a place where you're not in exactly the right place, and the exploration to find the right place is sort of what keeps you going. So
got it. Love it. Joe, appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
And episode 66 of the 1004 show. If you guys liked it, share it with your friends, tell the world, and visit Eugene.